everyone, and welcome to SUNUP. I'm Lyndall Stout. For the most part, Oklahoma's wheat crop is well on its way, but some producers were waiting for last week's rainfall. For an update, here's our Extension small grain specialist, Dr. Amanda Silva.
Yeah, so I can't say enough how tough it was October for our wheat producers. It was a very dry month. Some producers just decided to dust in their wheat and waited for rain. Some people were able to plant a little bit deeper in the profile and get some moisture. And some people just decided to wait for a rain at all, and we might see drills rolling here as soon as soil conditions are good.
The last little bit of planting, how far along is planting statewide on average?
I think on average we are about, according to the USDA latest report, we are about 88% planted. And so, you're almost there.
We've seen some real extreme temperature changes. Talk about how some of these extremes might impact that newly emerged wheat and what's happening with the plants.
So the wheat can tolerate low temperatures really well. What I'm seeing here in one of our plots that has been recently emerged, it's the symptoms of this cold temperatures from last week. So we are seeing like color bands in the leaf, and that is mainly due to the exposure to the cool temperatures. But that is not a big concern right now. The wheat will grow out of it and will be okay.
That's good to hear.
Yeah.
For those who are just now getting the seed in the ground, what kind of guidance do you have for them just getting started? And naturally, the temperatures will be dropping off.
Yeah, so the wheat germination starts to slow down in cool soil temperatures. So one of the things that are good to keep in mind is that maybe producers should start to think about bumping that seeding rate to compensate for this slow germination and emergence in cooler soils. So bumping that seeding rate can help to offset for the reduction in tillering production as we start this late planting window. Other things are using in-furrow phosphorus fertilizer to help with that plant establishment and root development. Also, since the seeds will be sitting there in the cooler soils for maybe a little bit longer period of time, it's good to treat their seed with fungicide to protect the seedling. And just, it's late to change a variety right now, but it's good to have a variety that it's quick out of the gate, so that has the emergence that will emerge fast. One good example is that new OSU variety that it is intended for very late planting.
So get the wheat started before it gets really cold for the winter.
Yes.
All righty. Well, thanks for the update, Amanda. We will see you again soon.
Welcome to the Mesonet Weather Report. I'm Wes Lee. After an extremely dry start, October ended with a bang. More than expected rain, ice, and snow totals added much needed moisture to the state's soils. This 10-inch fractional water map from the 3rd gives us an idea of the current moisture levels at that depth. A fractional water index is simply how wet was the gauge reading at that depth. It does not take into account soil above or below that level. A 1 tells us that the gauge is reading very wet, and a 0 means the gauge is not detecting any soil moisture. The green areas show where we are in pretty good shape at this depth. The 2 very dry holdouts show up as red in Harmon County and the Panhandle. Before the last big storm, the soils were in much worse shape. A full 2/3 of the state were yellow or red, including some of our most important wheat areas. Another way of looking at this improvement is with this weekly change in the 10-inch fractional water map. The green areas show an improvement of conditions. Eric and Marshall both recovered from 0 to a full 1.0 over the week. Rain prospects look pretty good next week as well, as seen by this prediction outlook. The greens indicate a higher than normal chance of precipitation. Now here's Gary with the latest drought map.
Thanks, Wes, and good morning, everyone. Well, we finally got some of that ice and snow to melt, and it looked great on the Mesonet maps. What did it do for our Drought Monitor map? Let's take a look. Well, as you can see, compared to last week, we have a much better looking map. Now we have drought confined to far western Oklahoma, southwestern Oklahoma from Harmon County up to parts of Roger Mills County. Now we still have some of those yellows around those drought areas. That's the abnormally dry conditions. That is not necessarily going into drought this time. It's more coming out of drought. And then we have that area down in south central Oklahoma. That's an area we're going to have to watch more closely for drought development. That's an area that's possibly going into drought. They've missed out on the good rainfalls. Speaking of the good rainfall, and actually ice and snow, it would be nicer if it was mostly rain, but over the last 30 days we can see some really generous rainfall amounts. Again, some of this is melted snow and ice, but 4 to 5 inches across many parts of the state. It's hard to see the areas that don't have a lot of good rainfall on this map, so let's take a look at the departure from normal map for this same time frame. Then we can see those areas with deficits. Well, anywhere in the green, those are the places that did really well with this past storm. But we see those areas in yellow, down in yellow and orangish color, down in south central and southeast Oklahoma. Deficits for the last 30 days getting up there close to 3 inches for some areas. So that's going to be, like I said previously, an area we're going to have to watch for drought development. But other areas got a good dose of moisture, eradicated some of that drought, and we're on our way to hopefully eradicating some more of it if we can get some more rainfall. So we got a good boost, one good storm. Now we need another good storm or just a few smaller storms to really put us into some action across west central Oklahoma, areas that missed out on the good rains and snows and ice this last go round. That's it for this time. We'll see you next time on the Mesonet Weather Report.
During the recent ice storm, much of the Oklahoma wheat country got to see anywhere from 2 to 4 inches of rain. And Brian, that rain actually impacts the soil nutrition for 4 different crops like wheat.
Yeah, so what we're looking at, primarily it's the nitrogen. We're looking at our mobile nutrients, nitrogen, sulfur, boron, chlorine, but the real big thought at this time with the wheat crop is nitrogen. In the nitrogen cycle, we teach that there's 4 pathways of loss. 2 occur when it's hot and dry, so we can rule those out. The other 2 occur in weather like this and occur because of excess moisture. So the first is leaching. It had about 4.5 inches right here is about what we accumulated. All of it's moving down. So any nitrogen that would have been applied pre-plant, irregardless of the source, would have been converted to nitrate more than likely, because it only takes ammonium, if you put it down as anhydrous, about a week to convert completely to nitrate. So anything setting in nitrate form, as that water comes in and starts percolating into the soil and moving downward, like we see with a slow, continuous rainfall event, that nitrate's just going to move down in the soil depth. Where we will get into problems with this rainfall is on sloping grounds. That rain will come down, the soil moisture will go straight down until it hits a clay layer. That clay layer is likely following the slope of the field, and so that nitrate goes down and flows with that clay layer. So we'll see some movement down slope. May not be dramatic movement because our soils are pretty dry, but we're definitely going to see some movement. On the other side of it, we have the standing water. So this is what's called denitrification. It's when we have nitrate in the soil and then water stands for more than 7 days. And we'll see after about 7 days, the nitrate is used by the microbes to get oxygen. So they actually need oxygen. So they'll strip the oxygen off of nitrate, convert it to nitrite, nitrous, and into gas. So we see what's called denitrification, which goes from nitrate, which is a plant usable solid form, into the gaseous forms of nitrogen, dinitrogen, and nitrous, which are gassing off. So we'll see leaching, and then where there's standing water, we'll see denitrification.
So with the denitrification, is the nitrogen gone for good?
Yeah, the nitrogen's gone for good when it's lost that way. Now the volumes are a little bit lower than, say, leaching or some of our other lost pathways, but when it's gone, it gasses off, it's gone for good. It's going to be in the atmosphere and it's going to be redistributed across the landscape. Right now, what I'm looking at with this wheat crop is don't get in any kind of rush with trying to refertilize. What we need to watch out for is the wheat characteristics. As we warm up, we're going to get a warming pattern. The wheat's going to start growing really well. We'll start seeing that move. Keep an eye for nitrogen deficiencies, the yellowing of crop growth, things like that. If you're worried about some spots that might have, you thought have leached or have denitrified, when it dries out, get a Joe's cup with some urea or something and spread it in a spot to see if you see a response from nitrogen.
So if we've seen that now, really we need to be cautious as we get closer to first hollow stem. That's whenever we really need to be thinking nitrogen.
Yeah, if you're starting to see yellowing now and you're a grazer, I would be looking at ways to get some nitrogen on the field. But if you're grain only, let's just kind of wait, see how the winter plays out, see how our moisture goes. We may have good mineralization, don't need much, and our research shows that with grain only, we don't have to get in a really big rush right now.
Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Brian Arnall, soil nutrition specialist here at Oklahoma State University.
Well, that late October winter storm has caused a lot of problems. There's still people without power. So, Derrell, how has agriculture been affected?
Well, it was a mixed bag. There were positives and negatives. On the negative side, certainly, the cattle were exposed to, cold temperatures. Their hair coats got wet, either rain or ice or sleet or snow or, whatever form they happened to be in. And so there's no doubt that caused a lot of stress. This is the time of year when we're weaning calves. We might be receiving stocker cattle. Those kind of weather conditions are a real challenge for any animal, but especially those highly stressed animals to have to go through at this time of the year.
Well, you mentioned some positives. So what were some positive aspects?
Well, certainly the biggest positives, of course, was that we got significant rain across much of the state, anywhere from 2 to 5 inches. We've had very prevailing La Nina conditions, and I think that's what we're going back to, but this was an interruption to that provided a very much needed, batch of moisture. Our wheat pasture in particular was at a critical stage, and so this may be a very valuable thing in terms of allowing that wheat pasture to go ahead and develop, at least get us farther down the road.
Well, in regards to cattle markets, which markets, benefited from that?
Well, it's a little early to say for sure, but, probably, of course, during the storm, markets were negatively affected. A number of the auction markets around the state didn't actually happen. They closed that week during the storm. We had low prices for several weeks before that. And that probably represents the low. I anticipate with the improvement now in the prospects for some wheat pasture and getting past that weather that we'll see these markets pick back up a little bit, even though we have several more weeks of large runs of calves to market this fall.
What are you going to be looking at in the coming weeks as we start moving on into the new year?
Well, obviously we're going to watch this winter grazing thing from our perspective locally here. We're kind of trying to figure out how we're going to go from here, I guess. Cattle markets have struggled a little bit. Beef markets have struggled. And I think a lot of that is related to the fact that we're still very much caught up in the pandemic and the likelihood that we could see some additional impacts.
Do you expect, as we're going into the holiday season, that's kind of when our roast and beef like that starts to go up, with people staying home more? Do you think that's going to affect the markets at all?
Well, I've been somewhat concerned about winter beef demand, if you will. That's when we typically get into more of a restaurant-oriented, eating out kind of a beef demand as opposed to summer grilling season. And so I've been watching that. We haven't seen a lot of it yet, but we have seen boxed beef struggle a little bit, and I think that's probably related to the fact that, those restaurant-oriented cuts of beef probably are, they don't have as good a demand as they would have, certainly under other circumstances. So we have to watch it going forward to see if it continues to be a major limitation in the market.
All righty, thanks, Derrell. Dr. Derrell Peel, Livestock Marketing Specialist here at Oklahoma State University.
Cow-calf producers, of course, will always save back a few replacement heifers to go into the herd. And whether they're the fall calvers, where those replacement heifers are going to be bred here in a month or so, or the heifers that are being weaned at this time of the year and will be grown out through the course of the winter and to go into that breeding season next spring. One of the questions that always seems to arise is how fast should those heifers be asked to grow between the time of weaning and going into that first breeding season? And that's a question that's being debated all over the beef industry. There's been some research done here at OSU back about 12 years ago that looked at the percentage of the mature body weight that heifers would be when they first started to cycle, would be first ready to go into a breeding season. The heifers eventually grew out to be cows that weighed about 1,260 pounds, and that's when they were 5 to 7 years of age, in a body condition score of a 5, and in mid-gestation. So you have some idea of how big those particular cows would turn out to be. Now, if you look at this bar chart, this shows the percentage of the heifers that began to cycle depending upon what percent of that mature body weight they were as they were reaching puberty. And you can see that if they're weighing less than 55% of their mature weight, there's a small percentage of those heifers that are going to be cycling. And it'll be somewhere around half or a little bit less. If we want a high percentage of the heifers cycling at the start of the breeding season, we have to look to that bar where they're at least 60% of their mature weight by the time the breeding season begins. And I think that's a critical number to remember, because if you're one that's going to put these heifers through estrus synchronization and an artificial insemination program, you want a high percentage of those heifers cycling to where they'll respond to the estrus synchronization and have a high chance of getting bred to AI. Certainly, if we want to try to push the envelope a little bit further and try to get just the highest percentage possible, then we have to have heifers weigh 65% of their mature weight or even more. And in some cases that may not be practical because of the cost of the feed. I think the answer to this question is going to be very, very individual dependent. If you're interested in getting a high percentage of those heifers cycling at the start of the breeding season, we have to be at 60% of their mature weight or a little bit above it. And that means all the heifers must reach that point. If we're on the other side of the scale, we'd like to grow them more slowly and have only about half of the heifers cycling at the start of the breeding season, and let Mother Nature choose which ones of the heifers actually get bred early in the breeding season. First of all, we're going to have to save back more heifers because we'll have less of them that actually get bred, but our feed cost should be a little bit lower. So there will be some give and take as to which ones of these percentages of the mature weight that we choose to use as a target weight. And let's kind of round this out to give you some pounds to keep in mind. If the mature size of the cows in your herd are around 1,250 pounds, in order to be at 60% of their mature weight, then we've got to have these heifers weigh 750 pounds at the start of their breeding season. If those heifers are weaned about 150 days prior to the start of the breeding season, that means they must be gaining at 1 1/3 pounds per head per day from weaning into the start of the breeding season. So that helps you then design what kind of growing program you would need for your replacement heifers. We thought this discussion would help you in terms of deciding how you're going to go about feeding those replacement heifers this winter so that they're at whatever target weight you choose for them to be at the breeding season next spring. Hey, we look forward to visiting with you again next week on SUNUP's Cow-Calf Corner.
Dr. Kim Anderson, our crop marketing specialist, joins us now. Kim, of course, the election in the United States is the big news this week, but can we necessarily ignore the grain markets?
Given the price rallies we've had over the last couple of months, I don't think so. Plus, you've got about 30% of the wheat to be sold yet, so producers should be watching that price. There's also some potential to price the 2021 crop. You've got the corn and beans that's being harvested. They're going to need to be sold, and you've got these rally. You have the same thing with cotton being harvested and sold. And then you've got the uncertainty in the markets from COVID and from the weather and also from the election.
A lot happening, of course. So let's dive specifically into what you're seeing with the wheat markets.
Well, if you look at the wheat market, we've got, like I said, 30% of that crop to be sold yet. You go back to August the 7th, the December contract price was about $4.20. It went up to $5.80. That's a $1.60 price increase. but technically looks like the market's building what we call a head and shoulders top. Now, if this top comes through, and we'll know by the beginning of next week, you're looking at a potential 80-cent price decline in wheat prices. So I think the market needs to watch what's going on, or the producers need to watch what's going on, because there is the potential for significantly lower prices.
Do the fundamentals support that price decline, however?
I think so. You've got the world production record, world ending stocks record. Now it gives some indication that prices could fall off. Now supporting that, you've got tight U.S. hard red winter wheat stocks, you've got relatively tight Black Sea stocks, you've got drought conditions and planting, and I think that's one of the reasons we saw this price increase. But at some point in time, our importers have bought ahead. At some point in time, when things get back to normal, they're going to say our stocks are too high and the demand's going to shut down and prices are going to go down. It's just a matter of when that's going to happen. So yeah, I think the fundamentals support lower prices.
Livestock producers, of course, are concerned about grain for feed. What are you seeing there, higher or lower?
Well, of course, China's been running that market. They've been in the market for both soybeans and corn, and we've had that dollar increase in corn prices. We've had a $2.20 increase in soybean prices. Are they going to be higher than they were 3 months ago? Yes. Are they going to go higher from this point? That's a wait and see situation. Looks like corn prices are maybe topping out. Some analysts I read and respect say that when we hit this top, sell cash corn. Go ahead and just sell cash. On beans, I think their stocks are tighter. I think China needs corn and beans. That's going to hold our corn price up relatively high, I think, and probably drive soybean prices a little higher.
Anything dramatic that could happen in the next week or so that could impact prices further?
Well, next week we've got the WASDE report coming out early next week. The market is saying, and the analysts are saying that they don't expect any changes in the November report. And when you don't expect changes, what do you normally get? Change. So there's the potential for surprises next week in that report. Probably won't happen, but it is a possibility.
So be ready just in case.
That's right.
Thanks a lot, Kim. We'll see you next week.
Here we are in November, and November brings cotton harvest. And Seth, where are we with the crop so far? I know it's still kind of early.
Yeah, we just got started with harvest right before the ice storm hit. So we've got some cotton out. It's a very small amount, of acreage that we've gotten out so far. We've got some decent weather in the forecast. There's some rain coming up in a couple of, chances in the next few weeks, but we hope to get back in the field and start getting a lot of this crop out before it gets too late in the year and we get even worse weather.
One of the things about cotton, it looks great in the field, but you really don't know what you have until it hits the gin. And what are you hearing so far?
Yeah, so far I think there's been maybe a little bit of disappointment. But again, it's early, and a lot of times with cotton, the first fields we get to may be the ones that went through a little bit of stress early. Especially a year like this where we had some pretty good growing conditions for our irrigated, so we may be getting to some of the earlier planted dry land first. We're hearing a little bit of chatter about it being a little bit lighter than maybe the growers predicted. But quality so far has been fairly good, and a very small percentage of our cotton has been classed, even smaller than what's been harvested. But the quality looks pretty good. If we are starting on that earlier planted dry land, then that's pretty good. I think we just got into some of the irrigated when that ice storm hit. So
how are acres across the state as far as planted and potentially harvested?
So we were right around the last, certified planted acre number was right around 580,000, maybe a little bit less than that. I think of acres that made it through. I don't know how much we lost in August, maybe a little bit. I think acres that made it that far will probably make it to harvest. We're going to be harvesting. I would expect us to harvest over 500,000 acres. The final number, who knows where it could fall. And of course, if we get any more ice storms or any other kind of crazy weather, that might affect that as well.
Without diving too far into it, there have been some different varieties come out in different programs as far as cotton goes. Has that variety of varieties allowed more acres to be planted across the state?
Yeah, and it's really two different reasons. You know, it's like you mentioned, the varieties themselves, the maturity classes that we have access to now allow for some acreage expansion. You know, both, we talk about a lot of us going, you know, the cotton moving north, but cotton has also moved east to a certain extent as well. And so a lot of that has to do with variety, maturity fit. But, you know, you talk about the programs and, you know, go back to trait packages, herbicide tolerances, and to maybe a lesser extent for Oklahoma, insect traits has also allowed expansion, and also, you know, cotton to become a rotational piece in a lot of operations.
Which actually, you know, that allows, like you say, more opportunity for Oklahoma producers.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you know, I don't know if a lot of new acres are going to be cotton on cotton every year, but if you can fit it in as a rotation piece once every, you know, 2, 3, 4 years, it can have some benefits, and hopefully we can capitalize on markets in some of these years as well and make it a profitable crop.
So it sounds like it'll be another great year for cotton in Oklahoma.
Yeah, we hope so.
Thank you very much, Dr. Seth Bird, Extension Cotton Specialist here at Oklahoma State University.
That'll do it for us this week. We leave you today with aerial footage of the ice storm aftermath from the Cimarron Valley Research Station at Perkins. I'm Lyndall Stout. We'll see you next time at SUNUP.